I want to first of all apologize to those people who have actually read In Due Season, and I'm very happy you're here, because after you read the book and you realize who's talking to you, I admire your courage for standing by. I want to begin tonight by beginning two sentences, and I'm going to be completing those sentences in our time together. What is it to be a Catholic writer today, and what is it to be a Catholic today? Which is very much about what the Church in the 21st century is about here at BC. And I would be remiss if I didn't note that the Church in the 21st century at BC is truly a jewel in the crown of American Catholicism, academic and faith-filled. This is one of the few places where the real spirit of Vatican II is alive, stirred up, promulgated. And I really congratulate the university and you, John, for this great program. Catholic writer. I wish I could say that I became a writer because I had this great vision of things. Oh, I want to tell the world about great truths, and I want to just be a great traveler and tell these great stories. But it's really much more simple and much more venal than that. I became a writer because I came to high school at 5 foot 1 inch tall. I had played sports in grade school, but these boys were a lot bigger than I was in high school. And early in my high school career, I had a relationship with a very beautiful young woman, Carol Corsaro. Carol Corsaro was the great love of my life, with her little sweater sets and that peachy perfume that teenagers wear, and that little pearls that she would, University Heights, Cleveland, Ohio, me, a kid from the wrong side of the tracks. And I saw that if I was ever to get anywhere with Carol Corsaro, I had to have one of those leather sweaters that the big boys wore, you know, with the football and the basketball. So there I was at 5 foot 1, kind of mincing along a hallway one day, and this kid comes up looking geekier than I was, and he had one with a quill on it. The plot thickens. Carol Corsaro, I'm on your trail. I said, how did you get that? He says, I write for the newspaper. I know an English sentence, you know, subject, verb, predicate, Notre Dame Sisters taught me how to diagram. I can do that. I'll have you know I did join the newspaper and the yearbook, did get my letter sweater, kind of got Carol Corsaro too, but then she went on to marry a venture capitalist and lives in Malibu right now. But nonetheless, my writing career had begun. Also in high school, I went through, as you know from reading the book, a lot of mutations. And one of my mutations was the tough guy. We had a lot of Italian boys at Cathedral Latin in Cleveland, Ohio. So I tried to be this, I tried to be that. And so in this incarnation, I was the tough Italian kid with the black draped pants and the pointed shoes, you know, and the hair with the curls down here and the acne and the sullen look. So I'm walking down the hall one day, and Brother Adolf says, Wilkes, come here. Yeah, brother, what do you want? So I was a real tough guy. He says, look, I have a book I want you to read. Now, Brother Adolf was probably about 120 years old. He had more snow on his shoulders from dandruff than Mount Everest has snow. We love this guy, though, and he was the librarian. And he says, I've got this book for you. He says, this guy was a bum just like you, but he turned out to be okay. And the book was The Seven-Story Mountain by Thomas Merton. I read that book, and I said, I want to be this man. I finished the book Jerry Corsaro, Carol's brother, and I threw 12 cans of a beverage into the back of his sister's Ford and drove from Cleveland, Ohio to Gethsemane, knocked on the gatehouse door at 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 sheets to the wind, saying, "I want to meet Thomas Merton." I'd probably been about the 400th person that week that had read the book and had gone down there. Needless to say, they gave us some breakfast and cooled us down, and I never met Thomas Merton. But also at this time, a Marian old priest came to Cathedral Latin, my high school in Cleveland, Ohio. And he was another person that really captured my imagination. He was gaunt, probably 6'2" or 3". He weighed about 14 pounds, malaria, dysentery, communist beat, pull out his fingernails. You know, in those days, forget about sports figures. You know, we had Lou Boudreau at the Cleveland Indians, and I lost interest in sports after 1950. But anyhow, we had all these sports heroes. But the real heroes were the saints, were these great Catholic figures that we just envisioned ourselves to be. And this Marian old priest really captured my imagination. His stories about China and the people that he had been with, and I said, oh my God, maybe I could do that. So I want to be a monk. I want to be a Marian old priest. Meanwhile, me and Carol Corsaro and the sweater sets and this peachy perfume, you know, there was a lot of things going on in my life at the time. I decided I was not going to be a Marian old priest. I decided I was not going to be a Trappist monk at that time. I was going into my senior year in high school, and I was still with the curly hair and the acne and the bad attitude, and I go in to see Brother Summers, who was a new thing called a guidance counselor. This was no, don't forget, I'm 71 years old. You know, Jesus was a teenager when I was born. I'm an old man, and this was a new thing, a guidance counselor. So Wilkes is at the end of the alphabet. I go in, and he says, what are you going to do next year? My father was a carpenter, 6th grade education, steel mills, Cleveland, go downtown, you know, get the steel-toed boots and work in a steel mill or something. He says, hold on for a minute. You know, you did pretty good on these IQ tests. You know, you can go to college. I never thought about it. He says, he looked at the thing, journalism. Journalism, Catholic, Marquette. That's it. You always went to Catholic schools. Marquette was the only one that was teaching journalism at the time that he knew about anyhow. So a couple months later, it was me in a cardboard box being pushed onto a train in Cleveland, Ohio when I went to Marquette University, where I did phenomenally well as a student, graduating with a 2.34 average out of 4. Drinking a lot, feeling sorry for myself, all the girls from Oak Park with those matched sweater sets and the little pearls and the peachy perfume were getting their checks from Oak Park, and here was me, a poor kid from the east side of Cleveland, working in factories with my combat boots and greasy hair and face and fatigue jacket. So I go through these days as an angry young man. It was a very popular thing at the time. I read Holden Caulfield, Catcher in the Rye, and that was me. Okay. Comes the end of my college days, and all of a sudden I get this letter that's going to change my life. A lot of people had forgotten about me, but there was this one place that had not. It was called the Selective Service Board. And they still had my number, and they said, Wilkes, we're happy you're out of college, you barely got out, but now come unto us, ye that are heavy laden, and we will give you a military experience. I never looked very good in khaki, which I would have worn had I been drafted. I was always better in blue, so I joined the Navy. I didn't know how to swim, but I joined the Navy anyhow. So I go into the Navy, and I go through Officer Candidate School, and I'm on a ship. I'm in Karachi, Pakistan, sitting in the wardroom reading the Karachi Dawn, which was their local newspaper. Pakistan is doing a wonderful job. We are solving all the problems. So I look out the porthole window. Elephantitis, leprosy, tuberculosis. I says, what is this? All of a sudden it came to me. I studied journalism. I could actually be a writer. I could actually tell the truth about what is going on in the world around me. So there was really probably where my writing life began. At this time, also in the wardroom comes this, it was not Carol Corsaro, it was another beautiful woman with the sweaters set and the little pearls and stuff like that, but this was a Methodist missionary who was working in Pakistan, a nice girl from Nebraska. To make a long story short, a torrid romance, and we, all of a sudden, 8 months later, were married, Catholic, Methodist. That never happened in those days, but nonetheless it happened in my life. And right about this time, there was a thing called Vatican II that completely was off my chart. I did not know, I thought the church was still the Council of Trent and was going to stay that way forever. So I marry this Methodist, I'm a Methodist, I learned the church is one foundation, as Jesus Christ our Lord. I learned all the good Methodist hymns. I was going through this life as a Methodist, and I was loving it. The sermons were better. The people were, you know, a Catholic church. That's the way they walked out. You know, don't get in the way of anybody after Mass on Sunday morning, man. They would knock you right over. Now we're doing a little bit better. But those days it was, man, hey, I punched my card, I'm out of here. Methodists talked to each other. They had coffee after breakfast. I mean, I couldn't believe it. The sermons were actually good. They weren't talking about money. It was fabulous. But at the end of every service, I always felt I was leaving before the meal was served. The Eucharist was not there. And I don't know how I thought about it and if it realized that it was that, but I felt somehow I was missing something. Although I was enjoying the service and the friendliness and the better sermons. My life goes on. Now, don't forget, I had graduated with this 2.34 average. I was about ready to go, I wanted to go to graduate school. I called Marquette and they said, Paul, please don't, we'll have to embarrass you. We will not accept you here. Your average is too low. So they rejected me out of hand, but I was accepted at a small journalism school on the corner of 116th and Broadway in New York called Columbia. So there I go and I'm off to journalism school, where I am given a grammar book because my grammar is so bad. I am definitely in the lower half of my class. All my classmates had gone to Harvard or Yale or Princeton, and all were vice presidents. Their fathers were all vice presidents of NBC. And here I was, this little Slovak kid from the east side of Cleveland saying, holy mackerel, what's going on here? But nonetheless, I did my studies as best I could and began to write for newspapers and magazines in New York City. Eventually writing for the New York Times, and then I've gone on written for the New Yorker. And things are really going great. Man, I am New York Times, expense account lunches, taxis, you know, movie sets, this, that, you know, this is, I'm doing just great, just doing great. About this time, another priest comes into my life. Happened to meet this guy on the streets of Brooklyn. His name is Ron Petrosky. Probably the worst role model in certain ways as his life would unfold. Died of AIDS, was accused of being a sexual offender for minors, homosexual, just all the wrong things. But he was exactly the right man at the time. Because he gathered all those kids around him, not for some good purposes sometime, but nonetheless he said Mass. And when he held that loaf of Italian bread and that cup of Chianti in his hand, he said, this is my body, this is my blood. It came alive for me what this was really about. Something happened inside of me that I don't even quite understand. This is my body, this is my blood. And I really felt again that same flame that I felt reading Thomas Merton. I felt the same flame that I felt with that Maryknoll priest. This really matters. I really want to do something with this and about this. He was my path back to the Catholic Church, and not only to the Catholic Church, but to a life that would eventually have this marker in it. Wife number one. Now, I'm now married to number two, my second and last wife. I always tell her that, you're my second and last wife. She's glad to hear that. One morning at Mass, Sunday morning, he read the Gospel of the rich young man. And if you'll recall, the rich young man comes to Jesus and says, Master, what would you want of me? And Jesus says, well, do all this stuff. Here are the rules. He says, yeah, I got all that stuff. I do all that. He says, well, if you want to be perfect, give all you have to the poor and follow me. I went back to my house. Marriage was going south. I said, have the papers drawn up. I want to give you everything I own. Brownstone in Brooklyn that had just been in House and Garden magazine, a car, everything. Never even read the separation agreement. My friend said in New York, you were nuts, but anyhow, that's what I did. Had the papers drawn up, went to the Notary Public, he read it in the book, gave him $3 to have his signature, signed away my entire life. I was homeless, penniless, and happy. So I thought. I go and I find a fellow that had some homeless men that he had taken in. I started a Catholic worker house in Brooklyn. I knew Dorothy Day. I was finally living the life to which I had been called. I thought. There I was. People did not know what happened. Here is this New York Times writer, Columbia graduate, hand-me-down clothes, living with 3 homeless men. One of them, a Vietnam veteran who walked the halls of our little apartment muttering to himself. He was still at Da Nang or in some battle. A retired captain from a merchant seaman, Freddie, who was our cook, who had the very bad habit of wiping his face and then wiping the dishes at the same time, but anyhow, he was our cook. And the professor, who would not go to bed because he said, if I do, I will die. He lived in a Barcalounger, and whenever we would feed him, he would always hold some biscuits back or some English muffin or whatever it is, because he thought that the next meal wasn't coming. Of course, the cockroaches and the rats were always coming. Smell of urine all the time in this place. This was my life. I was so happy. So I thought. As I look back on those days, I realized that I was trying so hard to be St. Paul of Brooklyn. But God didn't know St. Paul of Brooklyn. God knew Paul Wilkes, but he didn't know St. Paul. I'm at the storefront, we get a phone call. Newsweek magazine, yeah, I subscribed already. No, it's something else, I don't know, whatever it is, yeah, come here. So, next day, this cab pulls up, this fabulous woman gets out with these Louis Vuitton bags and all that kind of stuff. She's a camera, Jill Kremitz, who happened to go on to marry Kurt Vonnegut, who eventually became a friend. But here was Jill Kremitz to take my picture for Newsweek magazine, because one of my books was about to be reviewed. So I appear in Newsweek magazine. Not that you need to, but if you look at the picture of this man, gaunt. I had a $16 rotten parka on that I bought. I wanted the cheapest thing I could possibly buy. I was always cold, but I was supposed to suffer. I was going to be like Jesus, and I was going to be, this St. Paul guy. She comes out, takes this picture, it appears in Newsweek. All of a sudden, I get a call from Westinghouse Broadcasting, Public Television. This is a fabulous book. We want you to do a television series. Here's the expense account. Oh, well, I'll do the television series and I'll have this expense account, but I'm going to stay with my friends here with the poor. Didn't happen. Didn't happen. I felt my life moving in another direction. I loved the poor, but I knew how unhappy I was. So I'm going to find my happiness here. Fabulous apartment in Greenwich Village. Major television series. At the opening of this television series, Gregory Peck introduced me. I have with me a fabulous young man, Paul Wilkes, who has written and produced a series that will go down in American history. Gregory Peck was reading. He was a spokesman for Travelers Life Insurance. He was just a shill for the company, but there was everybody. Gregory Peck was doing this and talking about me. So, well, I was quite the guy, obviously. So there I was, my fabulous apartment in Greenwich Village, expense account, major series, hot and cold running women. I mean, this is it. I have made it. I'm the Catholic boy, all that suppression and everything like that. Goodbye. This is freedom. The sexual revolution is alive and well, and I'm a revolutionary. Again, the unhappiest period of my life. God didn't know this guy, Attila the Hun, either. Did not know him. About this time I meet Tracy, who would eventually become my wife. Wonderful woman, open, kind, funny, tough, wonderful. But she was just one of a miasma. Can I use that word? Of women in my life at the time, and I were 2 or 3 at the time. I couldn't even keep the name straight sometime. It was awful. But here was Tracy, who was just different in a certain way, and we kept getting back together, and we lived together for a while. Bought a dog, gave the dog away, didn't live together. I mean, it was just up and down. You'll if you read the book, you'll see all this stuff. Finally, I asked her to go to dinner. And I said, I have something. She's very expectant. I said, I think I have a monastic vocation. She said, I was kind of looking for another M word. It's called like marriage. I said, no, I think I have this monastic vocation. She says, okay, monastic vocation. You're dead to me. Dead. If I ever see you again, it's with a blood test and a engagement ring. Goodbye. Go be a monk. Sublet the fabulous apartment. Put my address book with the hot and cold running women on hold. And I go to live as a hermit by St. Joseph's Abbey up in Spencer, Massachusetts. Finally, I'm living the life that I've always wanted to live. I didn't find it on the streets. I didn't find it in all those bedrooms. Now I have it. I'm the hermit. I'll be another Thomas Merton. I'll join the Trappists. The world will never know anything of me again. I will just kind of dissolve into the woodwork, and here I will be. I'm reading Charles D. Foucault. Anybody who has read Charles D. Foucault knows here was a man for whom the Trappists were not tough enough. He goes to live in the desert in Algeria with the people who would eventually kill him. Oh my God, this is me. I love it. I want to just suffer. Oh, this is so wonderful. I want to be this kind of a person. John of the Cross. Oh yes, I'm reading. I'm getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and on my meditation and the sunrise and the prayers and oh my. Again, I thought I had found my life, but I hadn't. I'm out in the field one day. I had a fabulous, it was here in Massachusetts, near Spencer. I had a really wonderful garden that year, and I was harvesting something, and it just came to me, said, wait a minute, I'm not happy here either. This is not working. I'm trying so hard, and I'm getting up at 3 o'clock, and I'm doing all this stuff. This is not me. God doesn't know Paul the monk, the hermit. He doesn't know this person. Tracy. I drive up to Provincetown, go to the Department of Health, have my blood drawn to make sure I didn't have any dread diseases, get the certificate from the Department of Health, buy a beautiful engagement ring, put it inside put the certificate inside the ring, put it in a beautiful box, and drive from Provincetown to New York City, Times Square, where Tracy had a job, which took about 4 minutes. I mean, I was like stratospheric in my pickup truck. Knock on Tracy's door in her office at Times Square, 43rd and Broadway. What are you doing here? I put this little box on her desk. would you open this, please? She opens it, takes the blood test out, reads this, Department of the State of Commonwealth of Massachusetts certifies that, looks at the ring, does not put it on, looks at the ring, and looks up, and I said, will you marry me? And she said, I don't know. But eventually she would say yes. Suddenly, I thought I had found my life, or I had lost my mind. I wasn't quite sure at the time. Because we got married, St. Joseph's Church in Greenwich Village, a wonderful church, and I felt very, very uncomfortable in this life. This is pretty ordinary. I'm going to be a guy with a minivan and a kid puking on my... I don't want to have any children. She says, look, we're getting married, we're having... I don't want to have children. I'm not, I don't think I want to do that. In fact, what really told me I didn't want to do it was she was 8 months, 3 weeks pregnant, and we were at JCPenney's buying the diapers because she says, if we don't get them today, we're going to get them on the way back from the hospital because we're going to have this baby. And she's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is not me. I wanted to be this guy in China. I wanted to be Thomas Merton. I wanted to be Dorothy Day. I wanted to be this hermit. I'm just going to be another guy in a minivan. Oh God, what a life. Baby is born. Baby's in a stroller. I'm pushing the baby on a frozen, Massachusetts, a nice frozen road there in February. And I look down into this little face and I say, I like this. I like this. I like this a lot. I like that kid. I like this life. Something's happened. But what wasn't happening was my writing life. Don't forget I had the television series, I go off to the monastery. I had kind of left all that behind me, and all of a sudden I realized, I think I got to kind of make a living here, and I'm not doing too good at this. Whereupon I came upon a priest. I wanted to do a modern-day corollary of Diary of a Country Priest. I always thought that was an interesting book, and let me just tell you what it's about for those that haven't read it. Diary of a Country Priest by George Bernanos is a book about a parish priest who is trying so hard to really serve his people, and he's always misunderstood. He's always misunderstood. He seems like a fool, but he just persists, and he's trying to serve his people so well, and you know that he's also very sick and dying, probably of cancer. I said to myself, I want to do a modern-day corollary and get a priest today who is dying, and what does his faith mean to him? So here I was in the Archdiocese of Boston talking to the personnel director and saying, could I talk to a priest or priests that are dying? That's what I asked. I talked to a number. Ernie Serrano, I don't know if you know him, he's a priest of the diocese, introduced me to Father Joseph Greer, who had St. Patrick's in Natick, Massachusetts. I met this man, and he was a real kind of tough Irishman, and I liked him immediately because he was a priest, he was imperfect, and yet there was a real quality about him. And I said to myself, this guy is a perfect New Yorker profile. I, who had never read The New Yorker, really didn't know it except for the cartoons, said this guy would make a great profile to talk about priests today and the vows and all that kind of stuff. So I write this query letter to The New Yorker saying, hello, I'm Paul Wilkes. I'd like to write about Father Joseph Greer, Natick, Massachusetts. Immediately get it. Forget about it. We don't know you. Who are you? Goodbye. In a freelance writer's life, no is not an acceptable answer. No doesn't mean no. No means maybe. No means there's got to be another way to do this. So I sit down at the typewriter. I go to my local library, Ware, Massachusetts, if you know where Ware is, and I look at 5 New Yorkers. I say, okay, what does this sound like? New Yorker profile. In the town of Natick, Massachusetts, the highest steeple is they're in Father Joseph Greer, his hair slicked back and blah, 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 blah. It was like a fugue state. I wrote a page and a half, sent it to the New Yorker and said, here's what the piece would sound like. One Friday night, there we are in our house. Tracy, I, the kids, a few people came up from New York. We probably had a few scotches in us by that time. Tracy answers the phone. Wilkes Place. Is Mr. Wilkes there? Yeah, Paul. Hey, hello. Mr. Wilkes? This is Bob Gottlieb of the New Yorker magazine. Bob Gottlieb. This was the man. This was the editor of the New Yorker magazine calling me to say, do the article on Father Joseph Greer. Finally, I had found a real role model in the priesthood. Imperfect, a bit of an Irish racist, who nonetheless, during the busing in Boston, when all his other the O'Malleys and the O'Reillys said, I'm not getting on the bus with those kids that are busing, was spit at, rotten fruit thrown at, he says, look, do I like black people as much as my Irish people? No, I don't. But God didn't make any garbage, and they're not garbage, and I'm on the bus. There was my kind of guy. Violated the vow of celibacy, imperfect, impatient, probably drank a little bit too much. But you could see in this man's heart, he loved the priesthood, he loved this church of ours, and there began my real writing when I profiled him for the New Yorker and then eventually wrote the book In Mysterious Ways, which is right back there. I'm not making any sales pitch, but that's the book about Father Joseph Greer, which not only talked about his life, but at that time he had multiple myeloma and was going to die. I followed Father Joseph Greer, did the profile of him as a parish priest, followed him, book came out. I followed the man most of the time in my writing life. I've interviewed a lot of people, I've written a lot of books. When a subject's over, the story's over. This man I loved. I was reading the breviary to him as he lay dying in the intensive care at New England Medical Center. I really loved him. And that was the thing that really changed my life, because I could see that the Catholic life didn't have to be this perfect thing. I could see that writing about the Catholic life didn't need to be these kind of hallmark cards about what Catholics are. I began to see that there was a way to be a Catholic, that you could be imperfect, impetuous, and that God was looking at you as an individual, not as a stereotype. I was not Dorothy Day. I was not Thomas Merton. I was not anybody else besides myself. Because I always had the feeling in my life that whatever qualities I had, they had to be changed. You could tell I'm a voluble, impatient person. Well, I was supposed to be patient. I was supposed to keep my voice down. It's not my nature. It's not my nature. So I wrote about Father Joseph Greer, and again, my life changed, and probably in the real best direction that I could ever have asked for. And Father Joseph Greer came to my house in Hardwick and said Mass, and my two sons, who are now 24 and 26, were his altar boys when they were 4 years old and 3 years old, and I have a videotape of that, and it's very precious to me, very precious. Because here was such an imperfect man that was such a great man. And I said, I'm an imperfect man. Maybe I can be a halfway decent human being, and I can write about other people that are doing the same thing. Since that time, I've been lucky. I've written for the New Yorker magazine. I've written a lot of books, and I've been able to cover wars. I've been able to go to Israel. I read a rabbi. I've had a wonderful writing life. I was there in Rome to cover the funeral of John Paul II and the conclave, and this has been, and the Catholic life and the Catholic writer. I have not been writing about this kind of hallmark card kind of Catholicism at all. I have been picketed sometime for my writing outside of talks that I had given because I'm not Catholic enough. I'll never forget, I was on a talk show once and said, "You sound like a Lutheran." I said, "Well, that's kind of complimentary, thank you. I appreciate that." So I've been criticized for my writing because it doesn't fall into that nice, neat little category of the Catholic Church is perfect and we're doing everything okay. I don't think so. But nonetheless, I always tell my friends of other faiths, I said, show me another way. I'm not saying this Catholic Church is the only way. Just find a better way, and I want to look into that. I just haven't found it. The Catholic, what do we have? We have this worldwide reach. We have these wonderful sacraments, the Holy Eucharist. I have a new book coming out in September all about that. I take Holy Communion to the hospital, and it's about what the Eucharist means in the life of people. I feel really fortunate to be a part of this Catholic Church, and I frankly am not going to let those voices take over that say you have to stay in line, you have to believe all of this, you have to check off every box, oh, you're just a cafeteria Catholic. And I tell people everybody is a cafeteria Catholic. Everybody. But here's the deal. As in a cafeteria, you can't just start at the end and say, I'm going to have all dessert. You shouldn't just have all salad. You got to take some salad, you take a mashed potato, you take a little meatloaf, and then you get to coconut pie. So that's social justice, that's liturgy, that's the compassion for the poor. That's what we all do. We're all cafeteria Catholics. We pick and choose, but you gotta eat a balanced meal. You got to eat a balanced meal. I've been threatening America and Commonweal, both of whom I wrote, in praise of the cafeteria Catholic. Of course, they probably wouldn't publish it, but I really believe that to be so. We are all cafeteria Catholics. I don't know where this all leads. I don't know where I'm going. I always believe that my life is this. I think, I've been a freelance writer for 40 years. As my kids, in my house, we don't use the word job. We say the J word, because I've not had a job in so long, so my kids don't want to embarrass me. But I look at my life as kind of like a high wire performer. Here's the wire. I am standing on the platform. There is the other side. If I think about the other side, I won't make it. If I look down, I'll throw up. I look at the dot on the wire one step ahead of me, and that's what I do. I take that next step. I take that next step. I take that next step. And God provides the courage and the way and the light for each step. Sister Helen Prejean, Dead Man Walking, has a wonderful way of saying it. She said, when that fellow wrote me the letter from the prison, and I eventually went to visit him, I didn't see a big picture here. God gives you a little flashlight, not a high beam, but a little flashlight to see the next thing that you're to do. And I really believe it. That's the life of the Catholic today. It's just God will provide the next step for you, gives you light to see that next step, and don't worry about that big picture. So my life is going on. I'm writing, the kids are there, the kids are growing and stuff. 4 years ago, my wife and I were in India, and we came upon a little girl. We had been taken to an orphanage totally by accident. It was an orphanage of Salesian nuns and orphan children. And standing next to this nun on this very hot day in Kerala, Cochin, was a little girl with sunglasses on. And I asked the sister why none of the other children had sunglasses. She took off the glasses. Slumdog Millionaire. One eye beautiful, the other eye terribly scarred. She had been begging on the streets. She was separated from her mother. The beggar mafia kidnapped her, plunged a darning needle into her eye to make her a better beggar. That's exactly the look I gave. I grimaced as I looked down into this little innocent face, and she looked up at me with the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen in my life. about that time, I had my hand in my pocket to give Sister $100 or whatever it is. This isn't going to do it. I'm yours. 6-year-old Rena, I'm yours. I'm saying to myself, and I didn't even know what it means. Since that time, we've been able to raise $500,000. We built Rena a new home. We're sending girls to college, giving them clean water, wells. We've taken on this little group that I have called Home of Hope India, which I'll tell you more about if we talk over coffee. That was the next step for me. God provided this fabulous opportunity to go to India, to be a part of their life, to help this little orphan child and the other children living with her. And I think that's what also, to answer that question, we talked about the Catholic writer. What is it to be a Catholic today? I'm not saying this is the role model. I'm not saying I'm doing this the right way. But I think the mandate of this church today is to say, bring it on. Take it on. That's the message of Vatican II. It's not coming from up there. It's coming from inside here. And that's our job today, to take it on. We see this structure is not working. We see it kind of crumbling in a certain way. We see the vocations are going down, but we see that we are here. And we are the future. This is the age of the layperson in the Catholic Church in America. This is our hour. And there are so many opportunities, and this is just one of them. So in 4 years, I've traveled to India. I go twice a year now. I work with these wonderful Salesian nuns. I'm not Thomas Merton. I'm not Dorothy Day. I'm not the Mary Noel priest. I'm just this ordinary Catholic guy who's a writer, who's a father, who did have a minivan, who did have a child throw up on his shoulder more than once. And that's the life I'm living today. Thank you.